right now going,
And what most of you from admin? 6 zeros. And you go
How are you tonight, Neil?
CG, Carrie,
I'm well,
Jennifer,
thank you.
Larry,
And you're looking healthy,
it's a picture-
picking up a little tan?
the picture
yes, a little
is
bit.
tonight,
Yep, spending a good amount of time in the
Ethics
water,
Committee.
which is good.
What, where?
Chase Park,
What do you do there?
I swim.
Oh, it's not that you're a lifeguard or,
No, no. But I was down in Rhode Island this past weekend and went in the ocean, so that beefed up the tan a little bit.
Okay, I don't know why it
But
stopped.
yeah. Yep.
Operation.
I've been trying to open up an email. It doesn't want to open. Try different.
can you get on your cell phone the picture that Doug, that is being sent out
Oh, that's a good, I'll check
on
my
Channel 6 or,
I'll check my YouTube. I don't have television, cable TV on my phone. But,
The CG tab.
let's see. Well, you know what, I'll try it, that one.
We did
And
that,
then go to the operations mode tab,
right,
and hit start stream,
and that's all you have to do.
go to live stream.
I could link into
It looks like
YouTube.
it's already started.
Okay.
I don't, that's the problem, that people don't stop it.
Ah.
Now, all you do at the end, okay, you're on.
I take it
you
Wendy won't be here tonight?
Go back to.
We don't know.
NBS 30, that's
think,
the server. and
If I recall her email correctly, she was having a dental appointment
flip the switch
and
off
was
and
not
it
certain if she was gonna make it following the dental appointment, if I
doesn't matter.
followed that correctly.
Okay.
Yeah.
and it wasn't clear whether it was a timing issue or a pain issue?
Yes, or a combination thereof.
Come in anytime and play
Oh,
with it.
my, yeah, I'm not getting any email, Wi-Fi connection.
Thanks, Doug.
Just got certified. What happens when you're early?
Oh, there you go.
Does that mean you know how to turn it on but not to turn it off?
I know how to turn it off.
Okay.
but Just hit that switch, hit stop streaming, and then leave it alone.
Okay.
Fair enough. That's why I didn't.
So are you going to lead us in the pledge and lead the meeting?
Are we, why would I be in that position?
Because Wendy apparently is at the dentist
Oh,
and is not, may not be here at
Okay.
all or may be late.
I can certainly lead the pledge, but I'm not prepared to lead the meeting. I didn't even bring my folder because my daughter drove off with a car that has it in it.
You know, good
This-
I'm pulling, we're batting 1,000 tonight. Let me see here, because I believe she sent the agenda, and that was how I knew that potentially, let's do the pledge, and then we'll figure out the rest. How's that?
That sounds good.
We will be led by
Pledge.
All right, I
I pledge allegiance to the flag
of
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay.
Well, in that case, I'll move around here.
So it is approximately 8 minutes after 6 on August 2nd. This is the meeting of the Ethics Committee. I am diligently looking for an email, which would have this week's agenda in it. Our chair may or may not be here this evening, but we do have quorum. So we can journey on a little bit. According to this email that was received 7:57 a.m. yesterday, this week's meeting will use last week's agenda, as we didn't meet last week, as we did not have quorum. The main topics to review the process, she attached, and so she had attached the document that I think that I had created, which was a rudimentary draft of our process, which was very much based on the work that Neil had done in between those two meetings around, doing some refinement on the documents that he has created and then refined again, and perhaps refined a fourth time, but that's another story entirely. But I think that was the some bulk of the work for tonight, was to determine if that flow made sense to folks. And so with that, Neil, do you have that document in front of you? Because I don't know that I brought it. Ooh, look at you, you do.
This is the one that you prepared.
Yes.
But you perhaps want to move to approve the minutes?
Yes,
I think those are the latest ones.
yes. So, I don't know that I can because I wrote them.
It doesn't matter.
Okay, so
Nothing precludes you from doing that. You can even make a motion.
I'll
on
make
them.
a motion to accept the minutes from the July 19th, 23 meeting.
And I will second it.
Okay.
All in favor?
Well, first, maybe somebody has an amendment. I don't.
No input.
Good enough. So the meeting minutes are accepted
let's-
as,
Let's
Well-
have a vote.
they did vote,
They did?
yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Yep,
We're
so,
efficient.
yes, it was lickety split, so. All right, there's that. And now, without further ado, so did everyone have an opportunity to review this document or the other
I did not.
documents that Neil had refined?
Let's see if we, let me just check to see if we can get copies of this. Suzanne, do you have your copy?
I don't have a copy.
Copy machine's working.
I have my copy on my phone, so.
I have a copy now.
Hopefully we'll have a hard copy soon.
For those following at home, we have some action items happening here. There are photocopies being made.
No.
No, those are the minutes, and then, there we go.
You want copies of, right?
Sure.
Always budget-minded. That would be unethical.
Okay.
Curious to see if I can open that other email, given the fact that I was able to open this one.
All right, minutes, while we're in this status.
Does not want to open here. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thanks. So does this seem in alignment with what we had discussed at the meeting on July 19th?
I agree, yes.
I think so. The thing that strikes me is the question around section A2, if the information in the request would be identifiable, discussion related to the request for advice will be contained in the non-public session. On the request for advice, I thought our position was that that would necessarily not contain identifiable information, and therefore, if we reviewed it and it had that information, we would simply not be addressing the issue. Are we now saying that what we would do is sanitize that from identifiable information?
That's what I thought we'd said, but I'm not,
My memory is absolutely imperfect, so I'm
mine
completely
too,
open to
Luke.
being
So
wrong.
I thought that if something came in, that we wanted to be able to give somebody something, in terms of reporting out, our, no, all the way through understanding that, it coming in that way, gives us just, one side of a bigger story. And that's the leading disclaimer statement to anybody asking for something in that way is like,
This is just
based on
this.
based on what the information that you're providing, right? But that to be able to provide somebody with something, if we were able to in non-public session say, we could probably answer this as long as we don't, and hold true to what we're trying to do as long as we don't name names or get into
Sure.
identifying details.
And then when you go to the public session and you read that out, and presumably, or possibly, the person who raised the issue is here, and then would they be provided an opportunity for feedback? Because that would be the point at which they could introduce the information that we sanitized.
Took out? Yeah, and I that we've kind of gone around and around, I think, on that discussion about how do you, how do you manage that? Full well knowing that, we're not gonna, we're gonna do our absolute best to protect,
Right.
the innocent, right? Or whatever, however, I'm tongue in cheek here, but that, based on the conversations around the technology,
Well, one thing I learned tonight
yeah,
is that there is no delay.
sure.
That, remember we had talked about it, for different things, we could get up and hit the switch and that would stop that turns out not to be the case.
So because my memory and my understanding of it was that we were going to try to provide some feedback.
Sure.
And that, we would do it in a way that met all the, checked all the boxes on trying to make sure that we're protecting the information of another party that, in this case, isn't necessarily gonna, if we saw that there was a likelihood that it could have significant impact on somebody's reputation, right? So that we were gonna proceed along that path and that we'd come out and report out as best as we could, based on, because we didn't want to ship people away for not filling out the form,
Right.
perfectly or to that degree. That was my understanding of it. If I'm hazy on this, then,
Let me play devil's advocate and introduce another variable. I really have a complaint against Jones, okay? But I don't want to bring it up and lose the case by bringing it up as a complaint. So I bring it up as a request for advice and do it anonymously. Because I've read these rules or these procedures. And I know that the committee will sanitize this, that's Luke's word, will sanitize this because it's clearly an identifiable person or damaging an identifiable person's reputation. And then they'll give me some advice based on that. Okay, the sanitized. Once they give me that advice, I know where they stand. And now I'm bringing forward the complaint. Because I know I'll win. Now, I don't think permitting that kind of game playing is desirable.
Is that necessarily game playing, Neil? If-
Oh,
if-
absolutely.
Well, I mean, it could be, but if I came in seriously not understanding whether or not this issue was an ethics complaint, and I asked the committee, and
Remember, this is an identifiable individual.
is it in the inquiry?
In the inquiry, we've gotten this inquiry.
Sanitized it,
No, yes, we're trying to sanitize it.
Right.
Okay, but the individual still knows
who they're
who
complaining
they're
about.
complaining about, and they now know what the ethics committee opinion is.
On
the-
one side of the story.
Right,
Because if I bring it to a complaint, now the ethics committee has the capacity to interview both parties.
That's true, but I'm savvy enough so that I present the ethics committee with the actual facts.
in which case, nothing changes though, because if they give us the facts and the facts are supported, and we say, we believe this would be an ethics violation, and then they come forward with a complaint,
But my point is,
What's the harm?
I've just avoided all embarrassment to myself by having two bites at the apple. If you say there was no violation in the first place, I don't bring the complaint. If you
Sure.
say there was a violation, I bring the complaint. I don't know that that's a good idea.
I think it is. I don't see it as two bites, because it's not, they're not having two hearings where they lost their hearings and get to hear it again. What they're doing is asking, am I in the ball field? And if we say, yes, you're in the ball field, then we have a ruling on the entire case. But again, we would have to make clear to everyone that, as Eileen said, this is only based on the information we have thus far. I don't think you can prevent gamesmanship.
Well, we can if we say we will only deal in requests for advice and requests for written advisory opinions with situations that are theoretical and not ones in which we're really talking about identifiable people. So I guess I'm going back to the question about, do we accept identified complaints and handle them in non-public session, which is what we're saying we're doing now, and this is the procedure sets out how we would do that.
So that goes back to the question that I had asked a few minutes ago, and what I thought I understood, correct me if I'm wrong, is that we discussed this earlier and decided that we would err on the side of giving people an opportunity?
I agree with you that that's where we had come out up to this point.
Okay,
I'm not suggesting that,
okay,
other than that, I'm suggesting that
We
I'm having
reconsider.
second thoughts about that.
understand.
And I think we have, right? Like, I mean, if you go back and you watch the videotape on how we have moved around and around on, this is our stuck point, right? Like, do we, accept something that is identifiable in this capacity, or do we not? Or, and the straddling the midline is like, yeah, we accept it, we sanitize it, I'll use your word, to try to protect, because I think the reason behind that decision was that we didn't want to stop anybody from availing themselves of this process because they didn't fill the form out right, or they didn't have the sophistication to understand how to, I think,
Well, but wait a
I
second.
think that's how we arrived here.
You may be right.
Yeah.
But the obvious solution for that is to tell the person, please go back and resubmit the form and eliminate A, B, and C.
Yep. If they're
Identified.
If they're
If
identified.
it's not
Right, and
anonymous.
Yeah.
then, and if they do that, then it becomes unidentified.
No, if the person
If the
submitting
complainant.
the request can be anonymously submitted, so how do you go back to someone who anonymously submits their concern?
You have a public announcement here. We have a complaint from anonymous person which identifies an individual. We would request that person to resubmit in a way that does not identify the individual.
Okay, and then let me back up a step further, Neil, to your original scenario. What's the difference if that person scrubs their initial question of identifying information, gets their readout, and then proceeds to a complaint based on that same feedback that we gave them? How is that any different?
Oh. I'm not sure I follow.
Well, your concern, as I understand it, was that somebody could submit a request for guidance or advice to the committee. We give them a response in some form, and then they use that information to, I think you said, have a second bite at the apple and file a complaint. And my original point is, I don't see that as a second bite at the apple. I see that frankly as an education process prior to a formalized complaint. However, to your point, if someone is gaming the system, how would the scenario in scene B, where the original request had no identifying information, but it had the issue, and said, let's say, oops, something in the town happened, or would this be an ethical violation if A, B, and C happened, and we go through A, B, and C, and we say, yes, it would be, and then they file a complaint? Isn't that what we want them? I mean, isn't that the process that would normally be followed?
Point taken. Separate issue, though, is the non-public handling of some of these disputes. That's separate from the issue that you were dealing with, and I think you have a good point. It is a second bite at the apple, but it's just a little bite. And I think I probably am wrong to worry about it as much as I
But,
thought
you
I
know,
did.
to this discussion, though, I'm open, because it achieves the same thing. It actually feels better that somebody else is doing the, I hate the word, but it works, sanitizing, right? Like, I don't ever want to stop anybody from getting what they need through this process. That's why we're here. I do like, you know, I absolutely live with going into public session and saying, we received a complaint, but it had identifying information. You know, we'd really like you to avail yourself of this process. Please resubmit, taking out anything that's going to identify somebody. We'll be happy to review it. You know, I can live with that. You know, I'm not sure how the rest of you feel about it, but I certainly could live with that versus us in non-public trying to figure out how to, you know, a way to say it without saying it.
For me, I think it's going to be a case-by-case basis, and that line would be based on the potential harm to reputation that we talked about. Is it a significant potential harm? Are they saying this person didn't fill out a form, or are they saying this person violated something significant?
Yep.
And at that point, we could say, yeah, you know, this needs to be redone. At the end of the day, however, even if that person who submitted the complaint or the request for information or advice up front, they submitted it, they take it back, they redact all of the identifying information, they put it in again, we give them the information, we're right back to where they file the complaint if we say to them, yes, in this scenario would be.
But the difference is that in all cases, under your second scenario, our discussion and decisions are public. They're not being done in a non-public session, which is what we've set up now. If there's information, this is under A2, if the information would be identifiable, discussion will be a non-public session, and then the minutes are sealed. And then we report things out that protect identity. I like that in one sense and not in another. One of the things that I was thinking of as I was reading Eileen's internal process flow is what are the advantages and disadvantages of us having a public discussion about what the particular meaning of a section is? Is that helpful or not? When the Supreme Court has its discussions, they're in closed session, and they come up with a consensus view with dissents, okay? And that's what's public, but not the back and forth between the justices, if indeed that's what they do. And in the case of a single judge, everything goes on in his or her head, and there's nothing public. I don't know what the pros and cons are. I haven't thought through the pros and cons of having a public discussion where it's 3-2 on the outcome. And of course, we would, even if we have our discussions privately, assuming we can do that, and release a report, we're going to say, I assume, by a 3-2 vote, the committee thinks that Section 4 of the ethics rules requires this conclusion with respect to a particular set of facts. I don't know if if a public back and forth of different viewpoints of various committee members is a good thing, a helpful thing, or not a helpful thing. But that discussion, the way we're doing things now, is going to be public, at least under 1A, A1. In A2, it wouldn't be. A2, we would just issue an opinion that would say, by 3-2, this case involves a violation of rule whatever, and that's what would be made public with a statement of the facts in a way that does not identify a particular individual.
So basically, reading A1, it's allowing us to go into a non-public session, to have dialogue amongst ourselves regarding the issue that we have received, and then upon, we're not identifying a person or party, we can move to a public session for discussion and disposition. I think the discussion would be kind of a consolidation of our non-public session, to be able to put that out there to the public in a way that we've worked through any of our differences and come to a conclusion in the public session.
Under A1, my understanding is, as I read it and as I recall our discussions, is the only thing we're doing in A1 is determining whether or not this particular request identified a particular individual, without in any way discussing what the consequences of the facts would be, so that we make one of two decisions. No individual is identified, in which case we have our entire discussion publicly. Case 2, we determine that an individual is identifiable, and then we move to A2. And then we have our discussion in non-public session and release a sanitized version of the complaint and a fulsome, presumably, version of our decision. That's the way I,
That's accurate.
okay.
So, yeah, so for all information coming in, all correspondence coming in, we'd move into non-public to open it so that we knew what we were dealing with.
Right.
And then it would be sort of a triage, right? It'd be a sort. These we can discuss fully in public session. There's something in here that would, identify anybody. We can have a full, robust conversation in the full view of the public, which, I'm sitting here thinking about what you just posed, Neil. There's a part of me that says it's really important to have that discussion in public. And the reason for that is because if these were easy issues, people wouldn't be bringing them forward, right? So I imagine that there are going to be people who disagree with whether or not, it's a violation of ethics. There are going to, that we are going to have, and I would imagine that would be what the public would hope, right? That, they would get a viewpoint of, how a representation of their community sees this issue, right? And then the vote on whether or not, we have a consensus as to whether or not it fits, ethics violation or it doesn't. The value to me in that, the value add, is understanding other perspectives and being able to weigh out how those people came to make a determination. What were the criteria that they used? What was the process that they used to come to their conclusions? I think that's of value.
Other perspectives, what does that mean?
Meaning
Of
that,
committee members
Yes.
or of the public?
of committee members,
Of the committee members.
right? So, to me, that's the value add, because somebody bringing forward a complaint may obviously have one very specific view. It might be helpful to them to hear someone not involved at all having maybe a varied perspective on it. I usually can appreciate that. It can help me see things from a different angle. Might diffuse some of the frustration behind whatever's happened. That might be a value add. I can see it being a lengthy process, depending on what we're dealing with, but I think we'll also get a sense of how long it's going to take us to get through some of these issues, right? So we'll have a better understanding of how to be able to schedule things after a couple. But the ones that are, that come forward that we can do in public session, I think that's the intent, right? Is to be able to have a robust conversation and provide somebody with perspective and our
But
advice.
I agree with you, and I think that's the better approach. The problem is, the way we're going now, there will be non-public sessions for some cases, and I just wonder if we should
I like,
try to eliminate that.
to that point, based on the suggestion that you made, I can live with that. I can live with going into public session and saying we received a few of these that we cannot, on face value, based on the way that they're written, we can't weigh in on. We're going to encourage you to resubmit in a way that doesn't identify anybody. We'll be happy to, review them at that point. So please take another pass at writing this up in a way that doesn't identify anybody. And then we do the bulk of this in public, rather.
May I ask that you try to
Write that up.
write that up in the same format that
Yes.
you have here, and then, without making a decision now,
Sure.
we can look at that, and
Yep.
maybe additional wisdom will
Yeah.
emerge.
I absolutely think that that's a real viable solution, because the other stuff, right, we know it's pretty clear cut when it comes to complaint, right? Like that's a whole other ballgame, but.
So that I'm clear, where we are now then, is you're gonna go back and write it up in such a way that we don't consider offering any advice if there is identifiable information, and that what we would do in all of those cases is just come forward to the public and say, we've received a request, but that we can't act on because of the nature of the request has identifiable information in it, and that's not the process for dealing with advice.
Yeah, so our process would always start in non-public for us to open our correspondence, to vet it, make sure that it, doesn't have identifiable stuff in it. If it does, that group would, not be addressed we'd go into public session, we'd say we have, 4 in front of us, 3 of them we're gonna review tonight if time permits. We have 1 that we cannot move forward with because it had identifiable information. Could that party, hear us now, can you please resubmit in a way that does not identify anybody so that we can offer advice on that situation?
And it may be that a very brief description of the subject might be included, so the person at home
Knows
can
what we're
recognize,
talking about.
that's the one I submitted.
Yep,
It also occurs to me that when someone is submitting for advice, in whatever fashion, that doesn't, us giving them advice does not absolve them from following the remainder of the process, which is to follow the appropriate steps of escalation. It doesn't give them you don't have to go talk to
Nope.
the person, or you don't have to go talk to the supervisor.
Yeah.
So I don't think it shortcuts the complaint process in any way.
yeah,
So I will say that my bias is towards public discussion in as many cases as
Sure.
possible.
yep.
But we all know that at least the first committee established, with respect to a complaint, a non-public process. The entire process was not public, except for the conclusion.
Right.
And that seems appropriate.
Okay, I do have one other issue which I was talking to Luke about before we started. We are 5 ordinary people, and we are as likely as any other 5 people to make mistakes, and to reach our decisions based on a misunderstanding of what the rules are or how other factors might play into the rules. one of the adversary system in the United States has many advantages and many disadvantages, but one of the advantages is that the decision maker hears from two interested parties who are presenting their best possible case. And that's why you always want to hire a really good lawyer as opposed to a bad lawyer, because the good lawyer is likely to make a better case to the decider than the bad lawyer. We don't, in our situation, we don't have lawyers. We don't have anybody giving us a perspective for us to consider as to what the rules mean and how they apply to the situation before us. That bothers me for two reasons. First of all, as far as the committee goes, we might reach a decision which is, had we had other perspectives that we hadn't considered, because we're just humans and limited, we might have come to a different decision, so that our decisions look pretty silly. The other thing that I'm concerned about is allowing the desirability or undesirability of having other people weigh in as to what this public discussion, remember this is happening publicly now, how this public discussion should be viewed from the point of view of the ethics guidelines, the code of ethics. I'm not quite sure how to go about it, but I am concerned that we're going to reach some decisions which we will reverse or modify at a later date, and a lot of people watching or hearing or reading about these will say, boy, that group really blew it and went off the rails in this particular decision. To the extent that we get other input, we're less likely to do that. I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea, but I am concerned enough to bring the issue before you guys. And if I didn't make myself clear, or I was too long-winded, you'll let me know.
So if I understand you correctly, Neil, your concerns are, do we allow the general public to weigh in when we have our public sessions?
Not on the facts of the case, because that's the property of the person who brings the issue before us. Mm-hmm. But on how the ethics rules apply to that. Mm-hmm. We've got 5 people just as good or as poor at this job as anyone else making this, and I don't want us to go off the rails because for whatever reason on a particular issue we're just missing something. I don't want the committee to get a bad reputation, and I personally don't want to be embarrassed if we do something that had we considered another perspective, we would have said, whoa, that's the direction to go in.
Well, that's why we're being very mindful about our discussions, and I think we'll know more once we have realities, checking in for advice.
I haven't even begun to think, honestly, about the complaint process. I haven't even gone there in my mind. I've stayed in this part.
What is the complaint process?
Meaning like when somebody brings a complaint,
I don't think Neil's talking about the complaint process.
Okay.
He's talking, am I correct?
Yeah.
You're talking
You're
about the
talking about
advice
this?
process.
You're talking about the
Yes.
advice
We now have a situation where an identifiable person is sitting in the room. The complaint meets our requirements so that it doesn't identify a person,
Sure.
and therefore we're having this discussion publicly. Okay? We can certainly ask the person questions, but the person presumably either doesn't have an opinion or has an opinion, a particular opinion about how the ethics apply. And we go from there. Mary Smith is sitting in the room just because she's interested, or she heard about this case and ran down, whatever. She has something she'd like to add, okay? Not about the facts, because that's the prerogative of the person who brought the issue before us, but about why this is ethical or unethical in accordance with our rules. Do we allow the chair to recognize Mary? She's waving her hand out there, she really wants to say something. Or do we say, no, this is for the committee, and if we make a mistake or we do something that we later regret, that's part of the territory that every committee has, and we should not allow any members of the public to introduce other ideas or other perspectives. That's our prerogative.
Well, a perspective can be delivered, it's just whether we accept that perspective or not.
Well, that's obviously, Mary could make her statement, and we could say thank you very much, and then proceed to our discussion, and totally ignore what she had to say, or completely embrace what she had to say. But the question is,
Isn't that the prerogative of the chair?
well, yes and no. I mean, we could set the rules so the chair has that prerogative. We could set the rules so that the chair doesn't have that prerogative. If we don't say anything, and I were chair, I would assume it is my right as chair to recognize Mary and say, I see we have Mary Smith in the room, and she's been waving her hand. Mary, would you like to say something to the committee? And Mary then comes up to the podium and says blah, 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 and we say thank you very much. Maybe we ask Mary a question, because Luke has a question, and the chair recognizes Luke. That certainly would be the prerogative of the chair if we do nothing further. But if I were chair, I'd much rather be in a position where I knew where the committee was on these issues. That is to say, the chair has the power to do that, or the chair doesn't. Or I would not like to be in a situation where the committee discussed it and didn't do anything. Because that, I mean, the chair can do what she wants, but in this area, but as a chair, I would be more comfortable if there was some guidance from the group, so I knew that I couldn't, or it was my prerogative to do something. But again, the reason for this is I want us to get all of the perspectives before us before we reach a decision, not on the facts, but on how these ethics would apply to these facts. I'm not sure that we're the only ones who have, we're the ones who have to make the decision, but I'm not sure we're the only ones blessed with the ability to arrive at that decision and arrive at the best possible decision, one that will give good advice to the individual, and one that we will not regret and/or have to change at some future date.
All right, so I will say, we are the ones empowered by vote to make those decisions, and the ones that are ultimately accountable if we make a foolish decision, as you suggest, that we might not be sitting in a position longer than our term, should we fail to do the job appropriately. On the other hand, I see no problem with giving the chair the flexibility to acknowledge someone who has a question or feedback during this first portion, where all we're doing is discussing hypotheticals. We're not discussing an actual, case before us. And, of course, there's a balance to be had if you've got a bunch of people in the room and, the back and forth and all of that, you have to manage the discussion. But I think that's completely normal, as you say, for any committee to have to wrestle with where's the balance. I'm not a fan of overly restricting whether the chair has the ability to recognize people in different circumstances, because it's so hard to predict what any of those circumstances would be. And as I said, my bias is for public discussion. And I would hope that someone coming in is talking, from a position of good faith to say, hey, I have a different opinion about,
Or I have an opinion.
I have an opinion
Which I'd
on-
like to share with the board before it
Sure.
reaches its decision, before it gets into a fulsome discussion.
of the interpretation
Right.
of the ethics rule. I think that's perfectly okay, but I don't know that I would be in favor of limiting it or opening it in all cases. I think, we elect our chair.
I have, as long as, if the chair has if we understand, and it doesn't have to be in the rules, although it might be a good idea. If we understand that the chair has the power to recognize somebody like that, then I'm fine with that, because then,
Or not.
or not, I mean,
Correct,
sometimes you get people who have something valuable to add, and sometimes,
Yes, and sometimes.
yes.
Yes, we have the contrary.
The contrarians, right, and That happens.
And a good chair can astutely make those decisions and,
Navigate.
yeah. Okay, thank you. This will be in the minutes.
I got it.
Good, okay. Of course, when Wendy comes back, she may have a very different opinion.
At least we'll recognize it.
Yeah. But at least you'll see it in the minutes and, okay.
So Neil, the documents that you had created that sort of kicked off the internal process flow, what I will do is I will update this, this flow and send it, we'll do the exact opposite of what we did last time. I'll update this process flow and send it to you, and then you can potentially update your documents, and I think we'll be back to one document. It'll be EC whatever, one. There won't be a need for two. We've simplified that process if we go with that, if we go that path, right?
Yes,
Well, no,
no,
because it's still, the second one is the request for written.
Employees and people.
For written, right? So, but it's sort of the same thing, right? Because we're saying that,
if this is, remember, this is by, not a resident, but
Yeah.
by somebody who is an official of the town in some way or, and these people presumably are a bit more knowledgeable, and they should be asking hypothetical questions. If they are not asking a hypothetical question, it's really a complaint.
so would that mean that you're in favor of keeping the two form as well?
No.
Or just going to the one?
I think
Yeah.
the one form, as we've discussed, if, let's see, did we say that a request from a person who is requesting a written opinion, that has to be identifiable, right?
We had said that, yes.
Yes, okay. So we know who they are. And then I agree with you, it's the same process before. If they submit something which is identifiable, and we are in non-public session when we get that complaint, then we have to send that back to them, and we know who they are, so it's relatively easy to say, hey, you've got to change this.
You were talking about an advisory opinion, though.
A written advisory opinion, yes. So I think Eileen is correct that both of these are handled in the same way.
Yep. Okay.
And I would urge all of you to read the rules that the first committee wrote on how to conduct a hearing, in other words, Part C, the complaint, to make sure that we're okay with those rules. This was McCausland who wrote this, he's a lawyer. I thought it was pretty good. And we should make sure that we're okay with that. Maybe over the past 15, 20 years, something has changed and some of those rules need to be revised, but because we should adopt them if that's our want.
So if I could come back to the form before us right now, C has, on the second part of the page at the bottom, has nothing because a complaint would not be discussed in the session, is that correct? Is that why C is blank here?
I
C
didn't
is blank
move.
here, C is
Yep.
blank here because Neil's computer could not be coerced into skipping a line and putting C in the place of D.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that was a
So C
computer
is-
error.
C is D.
Yeah.
C is D.
All right.
Or D is really C.
D is
Pardon
C.
me, okay. Okay, I was trying to follow, because A, process steps relates to request for advice, B, process steps relates to
Yep.
request for written advisory
Correct.
opinion.
Yep.
And so C, table for further discussion would be the complaint.
Complaint,
Yes.
yes.
That's the relationship.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. And, because from my perspective, like, we gotta make a decision on this first part before we get to the second part. And I'm hoping that the second part is slightly easier. And I think it might be, based on the fact that there was some, excavation work done by the initial committee. Or I think they spent way more time on that than this. I don't think that they were as concerned about this part. But, right, like, when I think of the things that have changed since they convened, right? So this process is a little different. You know, we're live streaming, that wasn't there. You know, so much different framework, I think. Methinks, right? Because that was '06.
Yes.
I was a lot younger in '06, like a lot. So,
Oddly enough, we're all the same amount younger.
No, but no, what she's saying subtly is that a greater proportion of her life had yet to be lived than
Yes.
the rest of us.
yes.
That's what she was saying.
Well, I
You didn't
wasn't
get
making,
that,
I
did you?
wasn't making the broad comparison. I was just saying I
Yeah,
was
right.
wildly younger at that point, Neil, wildly. So, so for the purposes of tonight, it feels like we sort of have some consensus. I'm a little like, I'm actually afraid to say that out loud, but on this. And so I'm going to rewrite it, and then we're going to do what we said we were going to do, and then we can vote on it next time. And then I would recommend doing what Neil already recommended, which is at home on all your ample free time, diving into the rules for hearings.
I did review those, so whenever we're ready to go
Yeah.
into the complaint process and the hearing process.
Well, would there be some reason not to do that now?
Well, I don't have any of the forms in front of me. It looks like you may.
I have copies, I think, of, where is it? Yes, okay.
So, just so that I'm again clear, we have the one form that's gonna be used for the two initial issues, and then a separate form for the complaint, correct? That's what we've agreed to as a body?
I believe.
Yes, and so
I
we
think a
have.
form was established, right?
Yeah, and
Well, we originally established 3 forms and then realized that, well,
Yeah.
it's redundant, and then we had to have a space on there to either identify or not identify, depending on the nature of the, is it an advisory or is it a written request? Or a request for written opinion, excuse me. And then the complaint form is
Yeah, so we'll end up with 2 forms.
forms, right. Okay.
okay.
And so just to close that out, have we approved those 2 forms?
No.
Okay, so do we have those tonight? Could we
No,
do that?
because my understanding of what we had just decided was that for process for tonight. Gonna go back, I'm gonna revisit the internal process flow. I'm gonna send it to Neil. Neil's gonna revise down from 2 to 1 documents. We'll come back in for our next meeting and formally vote on that
Okay.
and spend the rest of the meeting refining
Okay.
whatever work we don't get done tonight on complaint.
I will try to revise both draft ECC1 and ECC2, which is somewhere, inquiry. And so that we're all working from the latest version. If I make a mistake, and because I'm not as organized perhaps as I should be, and send you something other than the latest version, I'm sure you'll catch that, and we can make sure it's right. But I agree with Eileen that our discussion should be very brief on the 2 forms and the process document, and start working on the complaint, and make sure that you've read all of the documents. It looks like this. And although it says adopted on July 31st, 23, it is actually a 100% copy from the 2006 rules that John wrote. Okay. Interesting, he has the burden of proof here. Clear and convincing evidence, which calls for more proof than based on probabilities, but less proof than based on beyond a reasonable doubt.
Many standards, depending, some of them are preponderance of evidence, or...
Clear and convincing evidence is
50 plus
defined as
1.
evidence which establishes a factual conclusion to be highly probable, rather than merely more probable than not. It requires that the party having the proof of burden place in the trier of fact an abiding conviction that the truth of his or her factual contentions are highly probable, otherwise he or she has failed to prove it and is not entitled to relief.
You're gonna lock the door?
Do we have the ability to lock the door?
No, I'm gonna do it.
Oh, you're gonna, oh, and then I'll just shut it.
I just wanted to make sure.
Then just close it behind us?
Anybody to come.
No, nope. Thank you.
Oh, if Wendy comes, she'll rattle the door.
Should we get photocopies before everybody goes?
I'll send this out again.
I have it, not with me, but I have it.
Okay, I will
Okay.
send this out again.
Okay.
So you'll all have that. Okay.
So,
that was for-
so he, that was a guidance document, Neil, that he wrote?
Yeah.
It's entitled Rules Regarding the Conduct, and it says everything that we're going to do. But there were two issues, obviously, before the committee. Number one, what are the facts? Okay, and the obligation to demonstrate what the facts are is on the person who brings a complaint. And that person has to demonstrate to the committee, not beyond a reasonable doubt, and not more likely than not, but, what was the magic words? Highly probable. Okay? So that's number one. What are the facts? Obligation is to show that it's highly probable that the complainant's version is the accurate one. If he doesn't reach that standard, that's the end of it. But if he reaches that standard, and these are the facts, then the question is are those facts a violation of the code? So, the fact that the town clerk took home the town's computer.
Hypothetically?
Yeah, hypothetically, thank you. May be highly probable based on the information that the complainant brings forward, but there may be nothing in the rules of the ethical code that says that's unethical. Okay?
On our territory.
Right, or we find that this is not a violation. Okay? It's factually accurate, everybody agrees. Indeed, the town clerk said, yes, I did. And then it's up to us to say, was she acting improperly? It wasn't illegal.
Yes, does it violate the
Right.
code?
And then, because presumably at this point, the issue is that the complainant is going to say, well, she used it for personal purposes. How the person is going to demonstrate that
Yes.
is highly probable, I don't know, but I suppose somebody could do it if you have access. Maybe,
Maybe they borrowed the computer next time and there was evidence on it.
yes, or maybe, in fact, the town clerk's personal computer is in a shop for repair, and the only computer that was available to her was this one, and we know that she was on Facebook, during that period of time.
And pay her a few bills, yeah, something like that.
Right. Anyway, so there are two issues in a complaint. Number one, what are the facts? And number two, do the facts constitute a violation of the code?
Did they have a process document in there, Neil?
I wouldn't say it's a process document.
To me, the rules are the process document. I have accepted your concept that they're not, but to me, the rules, they tell you exactly what you have to do.
Well, those are the guidelines, right? Those are the guidelines, right? So those are the, I'm about to do transportation metaphors because I can't help myself. So those are the guardrails, right? That's the place that we're traveling in. But how we're getting from destination A to destination B, which is, accepting a complaint and then delivering a decision, is the process, right? So how do we get, we know what the field that we're playing in is, right? Because it's the intersection of facts and the violation of the ethics code. But how we arrive there,
Read that very, very quickly and tell me
Okay.
if that, which he calls rules,
provide
is,
written notice.
if you would have another process document in addition to those for complaints.
All right, so we provide written notice of a hearing. All hearings, pre-hearings, and informal conferences should be held in compliance with New Hampshire's right to know law. Accordingly, all hearings shall be posted and shall be open to the public, except when the committee determines their reputations would be affected, in which case it will consider matters during a non-public session. Okay, use of recording devices. This relies upon minutes. Accordingly, any person who, well, and so here's an interesting thing, right? Like, so we record, right? We record, we go into non-public, all the recording stops, right? We come out of non-public, it goes back live. There are two sets of minutes, there's non-public minutes and public minutes, right? And we seal non-public minutes and, but it doesn't tell me where those get stored. Right, so we have a process area that we have not identified of where we would store non-public minutes as a committee.
But I may be, in that, I got your point,
Yeah.
you made it. In that particular case, I thought there was a town policy that said non-public minutes are stored with the town clerk.
Okay,
Okay. But,
all right, so,
yeah, but
So
your
that would
point is-
be, right?
I understand what you're saying
yeah.
now. Thank you.
So I'm just trying to walk through so that we,
I would add that the rules, as you said, are kind of the guardrails, but the procedure for a hearing, I mean, some fundamental questions come up for me. That would normally, I assume, be a meeting for the purpose of a hearing, right? It would be different than our weekly meeting where we're modifying the rules or whatever. I mean, it could happen at the same time, could happen instead of.
Yep.
But by way of notifying the public, it would be, we're having a hearing on this issue at this time and location.
Yep.
And
yeah,
because,
we'd have to warn the public,
yeah,
right? So we'd
provide
have
them the
to,
opportunity.
they need 24 hours notice.
Then there's the questions of, as Neil read, the obligation to demonstrate the complaint, it falls on the person who's the complainant.
Yep.
There are witnesses maybe, statements, evidence, all of those sorts of things. I'm not sure those are spelled out in the rules. They're normally spelled out in a hearing process. What, again, as you said, what are the guardrails for this? Does the person who's the subject of the complaint, what are their rights? How do you have here one side and the other? Is there rebuttal? Is there,
Yeah.
you know,
Does one witness have the opportunity to view the
Is there
evidence? Yeah, I
cross-examination?
mean, like,
right, is it all, I mean,
Yep.
normally it's all commentary is directed to the board, not to one another. So I think that's the difference in hearing process as opposed to rules of a complaint.
it does go into, and I'm just doing a high-level scan here. If the Ethics Committee takes official notice of a fact, it shall so state, and upon timely request, right, shall permit any party the opportunity to show to the contrary. So, I'm always looking for definitions in that, right? Like, what do we mean by timely request? Is that like, they knew that we had identified something as fact prior to the hearing, and so they have an opportunity to view and dispute? So are we required to identify all the things that we have deemed as fact and provide that to the other party so that they have the opportunity to dispute? Is someone compiling that, you know what I mean? Like, there's a lot
I
of,
do, and normally in a hearing,
Yep.
both parties are invited, and both parties have the opportunity at that time.
At the moment.
To rebut, to
Yep.
say that's not an accurate fact, or whatever. I have additional information, clarifying information. And that's the purpose, you have to have both parties there, and that goes partly to some of the concerns that we've been dealing with for the past couple of months is how do you prevent the gaming of the system?
Sure.
And one of the fundamentals of a hearing is both parties are there. They have to have these statements publicly. The civility of the process is maintained by the board. But you have to be able to provide both parties with an ability to fully discuss the issue.
sure.
So I'm not sure that that document lays that out. How you would do that, how you would have the actual hearing and say, okay, we're first going to hear from
Sure.
the complainant, and then we're gonna hear from the subject of the complaint, and then, you know, and we'll do that for one round, or sometimes it's 3 rounds,
Sure.
you know, depending on the complexity, so. I did note that, you know, there was an attorney involved in the
Oh, yeah.
writing of that, and I'm not, the definitions, the legal definitions of, you know, preponderance versus clear and convincing versus beyond a reasonable doubt, those are pretty lofty things for a decision for a body that has no ability to do anything but make a statement at the end of the process. We're not punishing anyone. We're not really doing anything but saying, we believe that this set of facts was contrary to the guidelines that the town adopted, period. And then other people will, so my point being, I don't know that we have to go, you know, we don't have to have a court level process, but we do have to have some
Formalized process that we always follow.
that
for
we always follow, and
Yep.
that the people coming in understand
Count, yep.
beforehand, so
Yep.
they know what the rules are. They're not walking in blind.
Right.
So, I'm not sure that that document does it. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure that it doesn't in some part. But
No, I-
that's what I
I-
would be looking for.
I agree with you, and, you know, I wonder if there is some current process, right, current hearing process for something that we could adopt, right? So that, you know, and I'm trying to think of what that might be. It could be labor relations, it could be, you know, it,
It's my world, and,
Yeah,
and
it-
so there is a, you know, I'm thinking of an internal grievance process,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in our organization was where somebody's complaining about
Yep.
somebody in, you know, on the
Sure.
board, whatever, and there was a very clear process for that, and I've actually gone through it several times, and it's helpful to have those, you know, boundaries
Sure.
established in advance, so I think there are many.
Can you bring it
Oh,
for
I could-
next time?
Well,
And-
what I can do is I will review that process and see if I can narrow it down to something
Sure.
that might be more suitable, and I'll come with something to offer, or I'll send it around
Okay.
beforehand, so that we
Okay.
can all come with it to say, this is the process I was talking about, not that it's the process we should use,
Sure,
but something to start a conversation.
yeah, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree.
And I will also, Neil, I'll compare and contrast that to the rules the guidelines that were established in 2006.
Okay.
I wrote on it, Neil, I apologize.
That's not a problem.
In red even.
I have this on my machine, so I think it's okay.
Send me back to high school trouble.
What, the red?
No, don't have that.
Yep.
Okay. When we first started this way back in April or May, Luke wanted to make sure that we educated, we fulfilled our obligation to educate folks. And I hope at this point he's comfortable that we couldn't have done that.
Well,
Literally.
I'm comfortable in the fact that we are past the point of being able to do it in the spring, certainly, which is what
Well, exactly,
Called
because
for.
we
just
didn't
got
know enough to
together.
educate. So maybe next spring
Well, what,
or fall.
there's a couple of things. One, I think these first 2 steps are gonna be helpful in establishing what education is necessary as we go through this, how many questions we get, of what nature, that'll be helpful. I think there's also a second part, which is we need to come up with a standard annual briefing for employees of the town in the different groups, and to determine how is that gonna be delivered? Who's going to present that to them? Is it just gonna be a read and review file? Is it gonna be, bring everybody in and sit down for 20 minutes or whatever? Those are the education piece. First off, we have to decide what do we need to tell them, and obviously the rules, anybody can read the rules. But what does that mean to them as a town employee? Or as a board member, committee member, you know? And I think those are the things, like right now, we have cases, in fact, one of the reasons we're back here is because there have been concerns raised about not recusing when people are involved outside of their occupation for the town in something that comes before that board or committee. And I think those are the things that we need to figure out, how do we go about.
How do you educate somebody on what's a conflict of interest?
What's a conflict of interest?
Yeah.
Yeah, when is it appropriate to recuse? When should you consider
Sure.
these things?
Yep.
Whoa. What we've been talking about up to this time is how to go about getting an issue before the committee. That's what we've been spending our time on.
Yep.
Okay? We have not spent 1 minute on trying to understand what the ethics code means. For example, recusal. Right?
Well, I would suggest that we have discussed what it means and that we have discussed the need to educate people on that, you know, our,
We've discussed the need to educate people, but we haven't discussed what the, what we are trying to inculcate, okay? So, for example, to take your recusal thing, I don't recall, correct me if I'm wrong, that we've ever had a discussion on the circumstances under which one should recuse in accordance with the code.
True.
So, if we're going to try to explain the code like that, in that detail, to people, we have to spend an enormous amount of time going over the entire code in the areas that we want to educate people and figuring out what the code means for that purpose.
well, I would say that we have to spend time discussing it. I don't know what the volume of time will be, because some things are more intuitively obvious to the casual observer than others. But I agree that we have not yet discussed what we would educate or what level of, you know, what our position on the board is on those rules. So for example, when is a conflict of interest, when does a conflict of interest rise to being an ethical violation if someone were not to, for example, recuse? If they had a fiduciary interest in the outcome of something that the town was doing, that's pretty clear. If they had some other personal interest, well, that's where it gets squishy. And that's the thing about ethics, is we're not talking about, you know, hard, fast rules that you can, and it's black and white in every case, and very few rules are like that. So it is going to be, again, interpretive. And that's why we have a board, so that, you know, my position doesn't overrule your position or anybody else. It's the consensus of the board, of the group.
I think the education will ultimately, be through the process, right? So, right, like, as we're sitting here and saying,
The education for us.
yes, and so, whatever the body of advice, requests, or complaints that come in are gonna, I think, be telltale about what are the areas that we clearly need to spend some time identifying for ourselves, right? Because, I could tell you what I think a conflict of interest is. Neil could tell you. I mean, we're going to have 4 very distinct opinions on what that is. When we have it in front of us and we're making a determination and we're going to vote, you're going to hear everybody's opinions on why they think this is that or not.
Agree.
Through that process, right, it's going to be this board at this time believes this is a conflict based on this. 3 said yes, 1 said no, and this is why.
And did you just tell me that my behavior is ethical today and will be unethical next week?
No, what I'm saying is that if there was a different group of people, so 20 years from now, that seated ethics committee might have a very different idea of what a,
In fact.
So ethics is situational.
yes.
Well, and also, all rules
How are we going to
evolve.
educate?
We're going to educate them based on this snapshot in this time, right? We have some standards, right? We have some standards. They're written out The initial committee in '06, right? When I
Well, the
was-
town adopted.
When the town adopted,
the
right?
set of rules.
They had this set of rules, and this was the interpretation of those guidelines at that time in '06.
Well, and.
Wait a second, I'm missing something here. The only thing that I have from '06 is the code. I didn't get any other interpretation.
What does the code say, though?
The code simply says, "I will discuss any matters that might present a conflict of interest and will recuse myself when appropriate." And the first part of that is, "I am honest with all with whom I interact in my official capacity. I will disclose any matters that might present a conflict of interest," my opinion, "and will recuse myself when appropriate," my opinion.
Yeah.
Okay?
So you have now 4, when Wendy's here, 5.
But
So how are we going to educate people?
I would assume that we're going to have to provide examples of what would or may be a conflict of interest from the perspective of somebody working in the town, either as an employee or a
Yep.
board member. So that's why I was using the examples I was using. You know, when I've seen conflict of interest in the past, it has been measured on, first off, is there a fiduciary interest? Are you making a profit? Are you gaining financially as a result of this decision? If so, that needs to be disclosed. And as I said, there are outside interests. It may not be a direct financial one, but perhaps your offspring is benefiting in some way. That's, again, squishier, but that's the nature of ethics, they evolve. The town, we have a set of rules right now that the town has approved, as being the rules. What you just read is open to all kinds of interpretation. I think our job will be to brief people, here are things to consider when you're, considering whether or not you need to disclose something. Does
Okay.
it get near this?
I'm a member of I'm making this up, of the ZBA, the Zoning Board of Adjustment. My neighbor, the guy who lives next to me, comes in and wants a variance. Do I have a conflict of interest such that I have to recuse myself?
I would say that it would be appropriate to disclose that your neighbors, but not necessarily rise to the point of having to recuse yourself. And those are things that in any of these cases are standard, that there's a different level of consideration. If the conflict is such that, if on the other hand, my neighbor and I are in a constant battle over the stone wall between our properties, and the neighbor is coming forward, and I have a strong personal interest and position, I may recuse myself based on the level of animosity with my neighbor. If it's just a factual question and I don't, I think those things are, again, squishy. It's the nature.
Okay, but you're making something you're saying something which I think, to me at least, is very helpful. We can educate by providing examples that we can all agree on. Okay? And those examples will not be comprehensive,
Of course.
but simply illustrative. We can vary them from year to year. We can add new ones as we come up with them.
Modify them if they blow up
And
in our faces.
the only problem I have with that is that as soon as we start giving examples, there's going to be somebody,
Drives a tractor trailer through it.
no, somebody says, okay, I understand that, but how about this?
Yeah.
Sure.
Yep,
And then what do we do?
yeah.
We say.
Have a
if you-
vote?
No, what you would say is if you're looking for advice, we have a process for written advice, and we would consider that as a board. But like anybody any member of the public could come before us and say, in fact, we asked them to, how about this? Right? And we have a process for handling that. So if they say, how about this, in a way, as we're doing our education piece, I suppose it depends. Are you doing an education piece where it's interactive and we're present?
Yep.
And they ask questions back and forth? Or are we giving them a manual or a pamphlet to read?
Well,
Those are things we haven't discussed yet, so.
you're right. I assume that if we're truly trying to educate, giving a pamphlet or telling them to watch something on television is useless.
Oh, I don't know. YouTube is very helpful to me in most aspects of my
When I
life.
have to fix a machine, you're absolutely right. But this is, this is a very different kind of thing. So I like your approach that we would give examples and then ask them if they have other things to come before us, because we've considered these examples, but we haven't considered your case.
Your case, right, okay.
Got it. Anyway, doing it live like that, interactive, even if we only do one group a year and the others do it on television or something, would be, I think, great. For example, if we were to go to a large department like the police department or Public Works and do something like that, have that interactive thing, that to me would be, if I were in that department, I would find this very helpful.
I think it would also be helpful to us, honestly, because, you know, I've done a lot of teaching over time for representatives, and what I found is I often learn as much as the students do, because no two classes
Yep.
have the same questions.
Yep.
You always walk away with more information than you went in with, and you always modify what you're gonna present next time based on what you heard last time.
And I think by spring, right, if we can get this going, by spring, we will have a little bit of a body of information to go on of what are people bringing forward, what are the pressing issues in this town, as places to hit high notes when we're doing education, right?
And what are the processes we're gonna use
Yeah.
to provide this education? Is it gonna be personal? Is it gonna be?
Okay, that's good. That helps me understand how we can do some meaningful education without necessarily overburdening ourselves, and without making it so long and lengthy and getting controversial that we lose the benefit of the education process. Yes, that can be done. Okay,
So that's a period on the end of that sentence, right?
yes.
Okay, I want to talk quickly about next meetings, what the schedule is for August, right? So I just clarifying. Tonight is the 2nd, so would I have the 9th, 23rd, and 30th, or is it the 9th, 16th, and 30th?
It's the
Let's see,
first, third, and fourth, right?
it would be, yeah, the first, third, and fourth
8-2.
would be the second, 16, and 23.
Okay,
Yes.
All
Second,
right.
16, and 23, correct.
8-2, 8-16, 8-23, okay.
I do have a conflict in there myself personally with the 16th and possibly the 23rd not being able to be here.
All right.
So far, I'm good for those.
I didn't bring my book, so I have no clue, but let's assume I am.
Okay. Anything else for the good of the order?
Okay,
All right, with that,
we stand adjourned.
we stand adjourned.